I was first exposed to Russia in Oxford by staying in the house of Boris Pasternak's sister for 2 years as an undergraduate. She had left the Soviet Union in the 1920s, been allowed to bring a lot of her father's pictures with her. The house was full of Leonid Pasternak's paintings. And upstairs in the attic lived ex-Major Ivazovsky of the Lifeguards, son of the seascape painter Ivazovsky. So 2 members of the old pre-revolutionary intelligentsia, and I learned more about Russia from them than I did from the university. Then I went into GCHQ deciphering old Soviet naval traffic, and then to Defense Intelligence, where I worked on the Soviet armed forces and particularly on Soviet strategy, until Labour government was elected in 1964, and I was appointed to a post in the research unit into disarmament and arms control that is set up in the Foreign Office, and the director was Hedley Bull. After 2 years he got the second chair International Relations ANU, and I was invited to apply. So I came here in 1967 and found that as far as Australia was concerned, Stalin had never died. It was 14 years after his death. It was at least a decade after Khrushchev's proclamation of peaceful coexistence. But I found a senior academic seriously suggesting that the Soviet Navy would come down and seize Manus Island off the coast of PNG, which at that time of course was an Australian dependency, and another, a parliamentarian, claiming that he had been on a Soviet cruise ship which had rendezvoused with a submarine in the middle of the night. This seemed pretty incredible to me, that an outfit as security conscious as the Soviet Navy would rendezvous a submarine with a ship that had 1,200 foreigners on it, and would assume that not one of them was attending a party or insomniac taking a walk on the promenade deck. But this was seriously pushed. It was, well, it was worse than being transported in time, because even at the most dramatic moments of the Cold War, Europe was not as obsessed as that. I remember later doing fieldwork in Germany. I was in 3 months in Koblenz, which is where the Moselle joins the Rhine. And there's a very good expression of the European attitude to Russia there. A monument put up after the Napoleonic Wars, which survived the Weimar Republic, the Nazis, the Kaisers, everything. It was put up by a French prefect, because they occupied the Rhineland from about 1792 to 1815. And in French it said, "The year 1812, memorable for the campaign against the Russians," signed Jules Doison, prefect. And underneath, also in French, "Seen and approved, Russian Commandant, City of Koblenz, January 1814. That it seemed to me that Russia, a member of the European system, sometimes rather large and bothersome and backward, but nevertheless a part of the system, not something totally alien which suddenly appeared in 1917. Demonization is the only word. The attitude seemed to have been taken from the most extremely anti-communist Americans. Well, they were crediting it with capabilities it didn't have, like coming down in force into the South Pacific to seize an island. Well, and you could take its hostility for granted, and yes, it was a nasty regime, and Stalin was a monster, but he was not a fool, and he was cautious. So they were being credited with expansionism going far beyond the reality of Eastern Europe. China was treated as if it was a Soviet satellite, which by 1967 it had long ceased to be. And there was even unrealistic discussion. Could you rely on the Americans to come and help if the Chinese or the Soviets invaded from the Indian Ocean, not the Pacific? I remember having to point out that America would come if its interests were involved, no matter which side invasion came from. And if it didn't think its interests involved, it wouldn't come from the Pacific either. Well, that nations don't have friends, they have interests. Naive demonization on the basis of opinions held by some people somewhere else. I suppose this was part of the cultural cringe. And after all, Australia used to take its opinions on the outside world from the Brits. Now we took them from the Americans. And there was no genuine work of research on the subject being done here. It was, conclusions were being reached on evidence so slim that you couldn't convict somebody of picking pockets on the basis of the evidence that was being produced. Well, basically, I suppose I did set out to try and change that. I can remember, again, another conference in Sydney at which Eagleburger, then I think Deputy Secretary of State or Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, right, trying to scare us over the Cumberland Bay. In his peroration, he raised his finger to the sky and said, "We are meeting within range of Soviet bombers." So I pointed out that actually we'd been within range of the fractional orbital bombardment system that they deployed in 1957. And we've been, under it for more than 20 years, and we're still here. But yeah, I'm not sure that they have stopped treating us as yokels.
Were you surprised by the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Yes, but probably no more than Gorbachev. I had read Amalric's book, of course. I could see some sense in the arguments there. And I was particularly noticing the economic lagging and the growth of an educated population which was no longer naive enough just to swallow the nonsense they were talking about capitalism. No? So I expected problems, but I didn't expect the whole thing just to fold up. I thought they would muddle through somehow. But then so did they.